And today we are blessed to be hearing from Elaine Braun-Keller. Elaine has been davening at Emunah for 20 years or so, but just recently joined, and we're so glad that you are now officially part of the Emunah family. In her retirement, she is currently studying with the rabbinical students, now Shabbat, second year, at Hebrew College, learning Torah, Hebrew, and hopefully this year Talmud. Elaine will be speaking to us about finding spirituality in odd places. Elaine.
I'm so grateful for this thing to stand on. Thanks to Mark for giving me the opportunity to stand up here and kind of make an idiot of myself for 10 minutes, but we'll see how this goes. I didn't realize we were going to read from the beginning of the Parsha today, so I summarized the first few Pesukim of the Parsha have to do with the red heifer. It starts, instruct the Israelite people to bring you a red cow without blemish, in which there is no defect and has had no yoke been laid on it. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest. It shall be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting. The cow shall be burned in his sight, its hide, its flesh, and blood shall be burned, and its dung, all the cow pies too. Then the ashes somehow possess some magical quality where they purify impure things. For a vegetarian like me, this is a tough sled. This is hard read. I don't know whether you heard about this, but I recently encountered heard of the white buffalo. It seems that cultures have things about oddly colored animals. They have various meanings in different cultures. The white buffalo, it's sometimes an albino, often an albino, is sacred in the Lakota and other Plains Indian religions. There's a legend that a woman came and taught, and this is a quote, 7 sacred rites and how to walk on Mother Earth in a sacred manner. She departed, transforming into a white buffalo as she left. It is said that she will return in the form of a white buffalo and bring about great changes on the earth, more than a little like Mashiach. So whenever a white buffalo is found, it's kept alive and lives its whole natural life in the hope that that particular white buffalo was the spirit of the woman and these changes would come. The cultural difference between the white buffalo and the red heifer is quite striking. Of course, the Lakota and the Plains Indians didn't have the burden of the sin of the golden calf in their culture, and they worshipped nature, and they thought it to be divine. To Israelites, nature worship is idol worship. And as they've just been reminded by the sin of the golden calf, all that hoopla, and it's not tied together nicely in Torah, but it's apparent that the red heifer ritual has a lot to do with the expiation for the incident of the golden calf, which is why Eleazar is in charge of the ritual and not Aaron, since he was responsible for that sin. Comparing and contrasting these two cultural phenomena, I began to think about the sorts of rituals in general, these sorts of rituals in general. In the ancient days, the concept of spirituality didn't really exist, but the desire to be in communication with the divine certainly did. As I read the Pesukim, I got to wondering what this ritual meant to the ancient Israelites. Was this a law of no particular spiritual significance? Like, say, mixing linen and cotton, wool and linen, or was it a feeling that performing this ritual, actually slaughtering this cow, somehow connected them to the divine? That, in turn, got me to thinking about spirituality in general and how it has evolved since the Torah days. Spirituality is usually defined as a feeling of connectedness with the divine or a realization or sense that there's something greater in this world than what we can perceive with our senses. So how does this red heifer connect us, or the ancients, to the divine? In general, how do we gain spiritual awareness now and then? Obviously, it's different for everybody. Some get it from studying, some by davening, some by meditating, some by chemical means. Some of them are legal now. I tried my hand at meditation, especially during COVID, because there really wasn't anything else to do. I got pretty good at mostly flushing my mind of extraneous thoughts, except the one thought that, when is that timer going to go off? That never really left me. They say that at some point, meditation is the point of meditation is to rid your mind of all those extraneous stuff, and that makes room for the numinous to enter. But I never once heard that doorbell ring. My sister, who is quite a spiritual person and always has been, and has just recently retired as a rabbi, is a disaster at meditating. About 2 minutes into it, she goes, "Are we done yet?" To be honest, if you're like me, most of these things, davening, studying, meditating, they don't work all that well to connect me to the divine. It can feel forced, and it can feel disingenuous sometimes. Full confession, I'm here often, and many times as I attend services and as much as I study, and I do it quite a bit now, especially at Hebrew College with all those new upcoming rabbis, I quite rarely get a spiritual buzz. Where's buzz? Spiritual buzz. Often communal prayer is a rote endeavor, and sometimes with a fleeting thought of, I'm a total fraud. Rabbi Shai Held has an expression, liturgical or ritual imagination. By this he means the ability of a person to suspend their disbelief about a ritual. He says Catholics are the best at this, since they truly believe that wafer is not a cracker, but is the flesh, and that wine is actual blood. Protestants, on the other hand, he says, are theologically opposed to such things, and Jews, Rabbi Held claims, especially modern American Jews, are best confused by, and at worst, disenchanted with ritual imagination. That is perhaps the best description of how I reacted to the red heifer. And for that matter, for this psalm, which we sing during Hallel, which inspired Rav Held's comment. The sea took flight, the Jordan flowed backward, mountains pranced like rams, and hills like newborn lambs. Some amount of liturgical imagination is required here. The psalmist is actually saying that nature is shrinking back in fear and awe of Hashem's power. We all love singing those words, but the words themselves, we get this nice communal vibe, but it may be like being in a big sing-along, that having the words actually mean anything to us. And now for the absurd segue. When I was a first-year graduate student, I was about 50 years ago, I could only afford a $200 car. It broke down a lot. I only had a $300 a month stipend from Brandeis, and I had a hard time keeping that car running. So finally, I went down to Waltham Cyclery. I don't know if Brandesians may remember Waltham Cyclery. It was on Main Street, and it was run by a very nasty man, old man. I plunked out $200, and I bought a cheap bike. It was light blue. It was a woman's frame. It had those suicide brake levers that you squeeze from the top bar that don't actually stop the bike. And it had these shifters on the stem, which are considered very bad these days. But it ran reliably. It never broke down. It never left me stranded on the New York State Thruway at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. It never had to be towed. It never had to be pushed, except up that big hill that went up to the Gersenzang at Brandeis. In a couple of weeks of riding this bike, I was totally booked, totally hooked on cycling. I loved cycling. 2 weeks of owning that bike on. I still have that little blue bike in my basement. But since then, many other bikes have come into my possession. I've cycled to the moon and back, partway back, over these 50 years. I have an expression. Take me off my bike, put me in a rubber room. I, like many other people, have become a bike addict. In a couple of weeks, I'll head over to Switzerland. I'm leaving next week, but the bike ride doesn't start for 2 weeks. And I'm going to bike ride the Swiss Alps. You can't get much more addicted than that. I have a very close friend, a training partner with whom I raced in the old days. We used to ride together almost every day. One day we were riding along and she said about our activity, "This is my church." I thought she was nuts. But as my religious life has become more intense and more mature, I began to understand a bit more about religion and spirituality. I started to understand that statement. I began to realize that bike riding was a lot like meditation, only a lot easier for me, except for the sweating part. My mind clears when I'm on a bicycle. I should have realized a long time ago this was a meditative thing when I discovered that the only cure to poison ivy itch was to get on my bicycle. It didn't itch at all while I was riding. Very frequently, synagogue melodies enter my head the entire time I'm pedaling until they actually drive me crazy. It's so metronomic, and it just stays in my ear. And I don't mind the miles passing. I don't even take notice of the miles passing or the time that I'm riding. My head is just in a different place, far from the normal place, even when I'm huffing and puffing up a hill. I think that's pretty much the definition of being in a spiritual place, except for the presence of the numinous bit. Again, I don't hear the doorbell ring. But now we'll invoke a little bit of ritual imagination here. In modern Hebrew, the word for bicycle is ophanaim, from the biblical word ophan. When you add the ayim on the end of a Hebrew word, it makes it two. Now, there's no such thing as ophanaim in Tanakh, but there are ophanim, the ophanim that appear several places in the liturgy. And that comes from Ezekiel's vision in Ezekiel 1. These are the angels that Ezekiel saw. They're the ones with the four faces and the wings and the gleaming wheels. And in chapter 1 of Ezekiel, it says, "As for the appearance and structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl." You remember the old steel wheels? They gleamed too. All four had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was of two wheels cutting through each other. That sounds a lot like a peloton of riders. And when the creatures move forward, the wheels move forward at their sides. And when the creatures were born above the earth, the wheels were born too. A great description of climbing a hill on a bicycle. Wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went. Wherever the Spirit impelled them. And the wheels were born alongside them. For the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. So, speaking of liturgical imagination, I may not be in contact with the numinous while I ride, but I am in contact with God's underlings, the angels, as I ride. Anybody want to go on a bike ride? Shabbat shalom.